Hello everyone, and welcome to this presentation on PrintShop Mail Connect. In this video, we'll be taking a look at how to create a personalized letter that will contain elements from external sources such as image, text, etc. Now, the first thing we want to do, of course, is to create the template, and for that, we'll be using the welcome screen. This is what shows when you first open the software, and all we need to do is to create a new template here, and we'll select the print context. PrintShop Mail Connect can also output email, but we'll take a look at that in another video. When you create a new print template, you can customize the basic layout the way that you want, so the page size, orientation, etc. But here the first thing we'll do is to change the margins, because the margins define where your text flow will go, and outside of that will be our static elements. You'll see that in a moment. So here what we have is the design interface. We'll see each of these different elements in other videos, but a quick overview. In the central part, we have the workspace. This is where we create our design. On the left, we have the resources pane, which displays all the resources used in the template. At the bottom right, we have the scripts, which define the variable data scripts that we'll be using throughout the template. And on the bottom right is the data model, and this is where we will see all our data, all the fields that we will be using to create the template. So the first thing we really want to do here is to add the basic text. Now this can come from any textual source. Here I have a notepad which has the basic text that I want. Now, if you had a Word document, a web page, or anything that you can copy paste in here, that'll also work perfectly. It will also maintain any styles that you have in the text that you're copying. Of course, Notepad doesn't have any styling. This is why we just have plain text. However, we can, as in any other editor you're used to, change the text directly here, apply different styles. So if I click on Y Renew and I turn it into a heading 1, then you see that change. We can also take a series of paragraphs and turn them into a bullet point. We can also select other text and make it bold. But what about variable data? Well, the first thing we need to do is to import the data that we want to use in the template. PrintShop Mail supports different types of data, but mostly we are talking about tabular data such as CSV, database, or XML files in a certain format. Here, let's just open a CSV file that contains information about the client, such as their name, their address, etc. You can verify that the actual CSV is the right one by taking a look at this raw data that's just reading the text file. And then we can set up the CSV properties. So the encoding of the file, if you have a different encoding, what's the separator, comment delimiter, text delimiter, and all of these. Because we have a generic CSV file that already has the first row as the headers and is comma separated, we can just click on Finish, and that will import the data directly into our template. So in the data model pane, we can see that we have 12 different records, so we'll be producing 12 documents, and we have the different field values for each of those, and we can move between the records to see the different values that we have. Adding a field to your document is super simple. The only thing you have to do is to drag a field directly at the position you want it inside of your template. This adds two things to your template. The first is the placeholder, where we're going to add the value, and the second is a script that essentially does a search and replace within the template to remove the placeholder and put the value of the field. Now, if we want to see what that looks like in the output, we can simply toggle to the Preview tab. Now this shows us the output, and we can again browse the records to verify that it is indeed variable data. Another thing that we can do is add fields simultaneously. So let's add an address block at the beginning of the letter to have the full address for the client. Now we can simply choose all of the fields using the normal tools that we would, the normal keyboard shortcuts. So if you click on one field and then you shift click on another, then that will select multiple fields. You can also control click to turn fields on and off. Once you have all the fields you want, drag them all into the template, and that will create the block of text. Now I'm still in preview mode, and as we can see, there's a lot of space and line returns missing. So let's go back in the design view, and we can just add the spaces, the commas, and the line returns that we want here. Now here, if you want to add a new paragraph, you can press enter as usual, but as with many different editors, doing Shift Enter will create a line return, not a new paragraph. And now if we go back into preview mode, we see that it looks pretty much okay. Now, this works if you have a single address line, but most of you will wonder, what if I have address 1, 2, 3 that are conditional, that sometimes have no values, and I want the empty lines to disappear? Well, what we can do in this case is to create a custom script. Now, don't worry, this one is actually pretty simple. Let me delete all of the fields that I added, and we'll start over from scratch. Now, placeholders don't need to use the @sign. We just use this because it's not something that we commonly see in text, especially not in pairs, but you can use the ones that you want. So for example, if I want to use brackets or curly braces, we can use that too. And then we can create a new text script, and this will do the replacement for us. Now here, all we need to do is to add the fields that we want. So we'll just add them and then change them in the field column. Now, between each of these fields, we can add separators, and the way we do this is to use either the prefix and the suffix. So for example, if we want to put a space between the first name and the last name and the FOA, all we need to do is to add it to the suffix tab, and that will appear after the field. Now, what happens if we want to put a line return? Well, here's a surprise. PrintShop Mail Connect uses HTML for all its formatting. So all we need to do is to put a BR, which is the HTML equivalent of a line return, and that will add the line return in the output. Now, remember I showed you this because I wanted to say that you could have empty lines that would be removed automatically. Well, here's the fun fact. If I had an address 2 in here and a line return in the end, if a field is empty, the field itself will not appear, and the prefix and suffix will also be removed, so you can use that trick to skip empty lines. Now there's a couple more elements that we can add to our template, obviously because a white letter would be kind of boring. So I went back to the design view, and here I'm going to add a date element. Now I don't want the date to appear on the left or before the address, so I'm actually going to put it on the right. In order to do this, there's a nice cute little tool that's called the inline box. When you click on inline box, it creates a box where the text wraps around it. Now, I actually want it to be on the right, so all I need to do is to tell it to be on the right. Now, if I were to resize this, I could have the whole text to wrap around it, whatever the size it was. But we only want the date at this point. So let me add the date directly here. Now, when you insert a date, you have the choice of having it in any format that you want that appears here. You can change the language at the top, and that can actually give you a French date, a Japanese date, or whatever you prefer. The Update Automatically checkbox will ensure that whenever you create print output, it'll put the current date. Otherwise, it just puts the date as of today, and that will never update. So it's kind of like a last modified in the document. You could use that. Otherwise, the current date when the letter is generated will be update automatically. And when we do that, it creates a script that does that for you, because anything that is variable within your template will be using a script. So again, we go in the preview mode and we will see that the date does indeed work. Now I can't show you that it updates automatically because I'm not going to wait until tomorrow to finish this video. Now let's add another box in the end, or another field, to have the person that is actually signing the letter, because we have different people this letter can come from. And again, we just add the fields directly into a new text script. Next, we're going to be adding images. So for this letter, we actually have images that represent the signatures for each of the 3 people that can be sending this letter. So what I need to do is to take the signatures folder and just drag it directly into the images in the resources. It's of course very easy to add an image, but we want to also make it dynamic. So the first thing we'll do is to drag one of the images directly onto the template. And then we can add another type of script, which is dynamic image. Just right-click on an image and click dynamic image, obviously. And here we can control what the actual image call is going to be. So the prefix already pre-filled to where the images are. So in the images folder in signatures, which is the folder I dragged in, then it's asking for the field, and then it ends with the suffix. Now we're assuming that all your images have the same extension. So here we all have PDF, but you could have all JPEGs, all PNGs, etc. Now the actual signature image is based on the last name, so all we need to do is to select the last name field and then click on apply or OK. So this already changes and we can see that the proper signature image is used, and if we switch to another record, we'll see that it adjusts itself dynamically. Nice, right? That was pretty simple. Now this is for dynamic content. What if we want a conditional content? So what if we want something to appear only under certain conditions? Well, we can do that very easily also. You can select any element, right-click on it and hit Make Conditional, and that will create a conditional script. Now this has to be based on contents in a data field. So here we'll select the country and put it equal to USA. So the default for the script is that it will hide an element when that condition is true. So what we have here is a client that is in the USA, so that hides the paragraph that I selected. If I go back to a client that's in Canada, then we can see the paragraph reappear again. Now, the next thing we want to do is to add a background, because you probably already have a PDF that represents your layout that has images and spacing and signatures and, address information. And you can put that in a background and just use that on every single page. In order for an image or any resource to appear on every page, we need to put it in what we call the master page. The master page is essentially a layout that appears behind your contents on the page, which is what we see here. So the address, the text, the signature, that's what we call the text flow. That's your main content. And if we want to add the PDF or any information that appears on every page, we put it in the master page. So first we need to import images just like we did with the signatures. And next we can simply place the image directly on the master page. Now by default it's not necessarily placed at the right location. All we need to do is to ensure that it is actually at the 00 mark, and that places it properly. Now when we go back to the main page, we can see that a background is indeed added. But what if we want this background to actually be conditional? So let's go back to the master page and hit the dynamic image again. Now in this case what happens is that the image name is a correspondence between static text and a field in the data. So we have the back FLT and the back MLT files, and that corresponds to the gender in our fields. So we can do the same as before, but we just add the static part of the file name in the prefix and suffix. So as we switch again from one record to the other, we'll see that the background changes. And let me go right here to show it better. And we have a personalized background also. Now I wanted to add another thing to the master page, and that is the logo. And we want to place it somewhere precise. Now the best way to do this is to use a positioned box. And this is a box that we can move, resize, essentially place wherever we want. When I add the logo to it, I can actually move the box, and the logo will follow. The next thing we'll be looking at is something that we call snippets. A snippet is essentially a piece of contents that we can add to the page either statically, dynamically, or conditionally. So the snippets folder that I have here, I'll just go in it, select the snippets I want, and drag them into the appropriate place in the resource folder. And when we add a snippet directly into the template, it'll add all the contents inside that snippet. Now, because the snippets I have are actually an address that depends on where the person is located, I'll also add this to the master page. All right, now let's add it directly. And when we do this, the small dialog that appears, the only thing that we really care about is the insert as shared content. When you check this, the inserted snippet will maintain a relationship with the snippet content. So if you change the content, it changes how you inserted it. Otherwise, it inserts the contents of the snippet, so the text and the images, etc., but it will not update if you change the snippet. Now, in order to make this snippet variable, we'll need to use a little bit of custom scripting. The first thing I'll do is give an ID to the snippet that I inserted. Now, this will let me refer to the element from a script. Now, if you click on any of the attributes in the pane here, so I click on ID or class, it automatically creates a script that refers to that either ID or class. So when I click on it, it creates a new script, and then we can apply our changes directly here. I'm not going to go into too many details on the scripting engine, but the most important part is that it is a JavaScript engine on which we've added an API to simplify interaction. Now, part of this API is to give you the possibility to load HTML from any file, whether it's snippets or external file, and this little piece of code is what does it. So, very quick explanation of what the script does here. Essentially, it takes the address block, so that's the results part here, and it changes the HTML inside, basically its contents, and the contents is loaded from the snippet's location. And the snippet's location is variable, so we're using the location field from our record in order to select which one we want, so SUI 1, 2, or 3. And then if we switch from one record to the other, again, we see that the change does happen. Now, last but not least, we'll be talking about styles. At the beginning of this video, I applied styles directly, like the bold and italic and bullet points and the heading. Now, I just want to explain exactly how this styling works and how to apply custom styles. Now, you've already seen that we're using HTML because when I did the text script, I added the BR, which is an HTML element, and we've seen that we're using JavaScript in order to do the script. if you know a little bit about web technologies and you put two and two together, you'll realize that styles are probably applied using CSS. And you'd be right. But you don't really need to think about complex CSS styling, because pretty much anything you can do with actual CSS lines, you can do directly from the interface. We created a nice little style sheet editor that you can use directly here. So if I click on New, I can directly create a style that can apply to anything I want. So for example, if I do H1, which is the HTML element for the heading 1 that we selected earlier, the Y renew thing in our text, then we can apply what we want to it. So let's say I want to put a different color. I can come here, select a red color, and when I save, that applies directly to any first level heading that I have in my template. I can also add another selector, and I can use the address ID to do something. So if I put, for example, bold, then it will apply bold to the address. So here we have our completed personalized letter. If I were to hit File Print, it would create a PDF of 12 pages that contain all of the elements that I have put. So herein completes the first part of the walkthrough on how to do PrintShop Mail Connect and a personalized letter. We will have two subsequent videos, one explaining the print output, so how to create customized output, including imposition, stack and cut, adding OMRs, and all the nice things that you'd want to do in your print output, and a third video which will touch upon how to create email output. So stay tuned and see you in a few clicks.